The first time we properly like met,
No way.
it was everything's on fire, right? It sounds like I'm making it up for like company origin narrative, but like genuinely, I think the first time me and Chris spent a lot of time together was sort of over the table nerding out on some Go concurrency.
I remember Tom just turning to me and being like, I find these instances really, really exciting sometimes. Yeah, everyone assumes it's like officially owned software that is, which team owns it? You're like, it's me. And I program it mostly when I'm watching my kids at swimming.
He'd done a dragon in ASCII and it was just huge. So it was like sort of, you had to scroll past this huge dragon in ASCII and it just said like, you know, warning traveler, like, you know, beware dragons, etc.
Our single highest traffic blog post.
This episode was actually recorded more than 4 months ago, and even though it was really, really good, I thought we weren't going to release it because the audio quality got completely corrupted. But because it was so good, we went back and had a look, and I think we've been able to salvage it. You might notice a couple times where there's a little bit of AI in there, but other than that, I think it sounds great, and it really is such a good episode.
I misunderstood what instant was for ages. My initial impression was that it was like kind of like sentries, you know, get the errors, but it's really more to actually respond to it, making sure that the right people are on it. It's like kind of when it goes wrong, it's like kind of like your special forces just like coming in, like you want to respond as fast as possible.
Hard one to explain. Every time I explain it to, you know, a family member or a relative and things, and they're like, what is it you do? And you sort of explain, and they're like, so you fix things for people. And I'm like, no, not really. Like we're a tool they use so they can fix it themselves. Yeah. And then it honestly, it got easier this year. If something goes wrong, a system's going to pick it up. It will fire an alert, and that alert has to get to a human somehow. And we're the software that basically fires it at their mobile phone, makes a, you know, loud noise and wakes them up and allows for scheduling and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's getting easier over time.
The place we've ended up is sort of not miles different to where we started, but we started in a very deliberate place, which was kind of what we saw as the gap, right? So we already had PagerDuty. I mean, like Chris and I both independently used, you know, tools like that for donkey's years, right? They've been around forever. And I think the thing that always still felt messy and like there was nothing out there was that bit where I've been paged, I've been woken up, I'm now sat sort of in Slack, bleary-eyed. Maybe if I'm lucky, I've managed to get a coffee, but like, now what? Yeah. And that tends to be sort of every company's starting point is if you're lucky, there's a process, but it's written down in paper somewhere. No one's really going to follow it when everything's actually on fire. And so there was this big gap of like, how do I find the right people, get them all together, coordinate response, make sure we're communicating effectively, like all that stuff was still very messy, unstructured, inconsistent. And sort of, I guess like at Monzo, they did it very differently. Large part due to, you know, the work that Chris has done. And that felt like, you know, when I joined Monzo, I was like, oh yes, this is how it should be when you have like well orchestrated and well coordinated incident response. And it just felt like that was the gap. And so we just went for that first, right? But I think that the long-term plan was always, you know, why would you only do that? Right? If you're now coordinating the middle bit where everyone's responding, why not go to the world after and do insights, reporting, postmortems, things like that, and also then go upstream? Like, why are you not handling paging and alerting? Because all these things work so much better when you own the whole life cycle, right? It's like, it's a better together situation where, like, you know, there's some really cool stuff we do, I think, where, you know, because we own the paging product, the status pager product, and we own the response product, you can kind of stitch it all in. And that just doesn't work if you're trying to glue stuff together with like some random, you know, script or bot, which is what most companies end up doing. So yeah, that's been really fun to see it all come together, but yeah, very deliberate starting point.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a dev tool, at some point, your customers are going to start asking you for enterprise features. WorkOS offers you single sign-on, skim provisioning, and audit logs out the box.
Can I just ask you about WorkOS?
We're doing the good version or the bad version.
There's not a bad version.
Yeah. So you guys use WorkOS, right?
So we actually use it for several things. So we kind of came across WorkOS when we were going into enterprise companies where things like SAML and single sign-on and authentication become like a big deal, particularly around like user management and things like that. So that was the starting point and like massively sped up our kind of development process. So massively worthwhile investment there. And then we kind of adopted it later on for like other similar security and enterprise needs, like audit logs. And I think sort of because we predominantly use it for our enterprise customers, the margin cost of that is reasonable. Yeah, they've been like super receptive. I think it's not a certainly not a cheap product, but sort of, you get what you pay for. And I think, it's stuff that I just haven't had to worry about or think about as a CTO. There's a ton of things my team haven't had to build. And, that's a godsend when you're an early stage company for sure.
Go to workos.com to learn more.
For me, at least, like until fairly recently, I was using a lot of like, Heroku, DigitalOcean, Firebase. And it's like largely the incidents are not necessarily like a lot of the time the incident is like just wait for it to come back online, basically.
Off and on again. We started on Heroku. We rolled plenty of dynos in the early days of instant IO, and that fixed a lot of issues.
But now that I'm kind of like trying to play around with my own stuff, it's like it gets like, it's pretty scary. You have this really interesting podcast that was like super helpful for me preparing, where you were talking to the person that is like responsible for Netflix's infrastructure. And it's like, I think Louise in your team asked like, what is it like when you're the person like woken up at 3 a.m. to put Netflix back online, basically? And it like, aren't you scared? And it must be like, I guess it's why like companies invest so much money in this space, because it's just like, it's such a, like nothing else matters at that point, where it's just like, just get it back online, and you want to get it back online fast. And everyone knows how like, if you've been in that situation, like, how horrible it is. It's a very interesting area.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think like it matters differently for different companies depending on different things. So like Netflix, for example, like them having an incident, an isolated incident, doesn't really like translate into like lost dollars for them in the same way as like an e-commerce company. So an e-commerce company's down, right? They literally can't transact. No one can buy their stuff. Netflix is sort of a trust thing, I guess, which is like people just expect it to always be there, and no one's gonna cancel their Netflix account because it wasn't available. They're just gonna be pissed off with it. But like regardless of the thing, I think you do, as a responder of an incident, you end up kind of wearing that weight on your shoulders, and that is really why software like the software that we built really does exist and people care about it, is because there is enough stress being like, Netflix is down, and like, how many millions of users are going to be using it, can't use it. And so you've kind of got that burden, and then you're trying to fix the thing. And then you've got all of the, like, I mean, like a lot of the time, like bureaucratic, but like often important processes as well inside of organizations of like, how do we communicate with people? How do we, make sure the right things are happening legally? And the fixing of the issue is like the tip of the iceberg. Is one of those problems where everyone's like, sure, like at Netflix, it's just like reboot the database, or like turn that thing off and turn it on again, or like go and get 3 teams to like work together to fix it again. It's like, that's like the sort of the small part. And I think it's like, until you've worked in that space or you've seen it at that kind of scale, it's very hard to sort of conceptualize why it is so important to have streamlined communication, coordination, like interactions with all these tools and all the different like disciplines and domains inside of a company, all kind of collaborating in one space. But I promise it's really important. You should definitely buy software like ours. Right?
I really love the idea that like a Netflix incident involves turning the database off and on again, like you just described.
Yeah, someone at Netflix like, what the
having chatted to their team, I think it's a bit more complicated, but I love the idea that they just have like an off and on again switch.
Yeah, push the red button. Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of wild. And case in point, we were chatting to them like recently. We launched some new stuff around live call transcription. So it's kind of you have like, you're chatting in Slack. That's great. You can see everything. We can see everything. We can do some cool stuff with that. But like the moment you jump on a call, you're gone, right? Yeah. And so we were like, oh, well, in the world of tools like Gong and other fantastic products, like why isn't that for instant response? So we built that. So we were talking with them about that. And like, we're used to maybe for us, an instant call is maybe 2 or 3 people coordinating. And they were like really excited about this. And they gave us some really great feedback. And I was like, out of interest, like what does a call look like for Netflix? And they're like, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like 60 people. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. Yeah, that's like totally different to my experience of smaller instance. I can see how this would be like 10 times as useful for you folks. Just in a larger company, there's so many more things to deal with. And like, even stuff down to, I know everyone that might be in an instant IO. If you're a large company, and I've been there as well, like you turn up in an instant, it's like we've never met before. I think like when
we had this at Monzo, right?
When Chris and I met for the first time properly professionally, so we'd like cross paths loosely online at events, stuff like that. But like the first time we properly like met,
No way.
it was
It
like,
was an
everything's
incident.
on fire, right? Because Chris
No
was
way.
Chris was director of platform. I was a sort of senior staff engineer over in operations, and so like when the whole thing goes down, like customer support's on fire, platform's on fire, and then it was like respond, follow up, right? Post-mortem. We had like super in-depth debriefs and stuff like that. So it sounds like I'm making it up for like company origin narrative, but like genuinely, I think the first time me and Chris spent a lot of time together was sort of over the table nerding out on some Go concurrency bug that we
Yeah, it
found.
was. I remember.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
It was fun. Yeah.
That is wild. Yeah. Yeah, Netflix is an interesting company, actually. It sounds like, I mean, obviously for other reasons, but I've heard that they're very like kind of, they will adopt like relatively new startups, like quite like openly, given how big they are.
They've made a big shift, I think. So it's like my external perception and sort of a little bit of like what we've heard from them. Like Netflix used to have a very like build it yourself kind of culture. So there's a lot of software that they wouldn't go to market for. And so when they came and spoke to us, for example, they were like, we have two options really, and they evaluated like us against a bunch of other folks, or we just build this ourselves. And like money's not the concern for them at that point. It's sort of, they'd happily throw two very well-paid engineers at the problem and be like, and they could already build something pretty good and pretty bespoke there. But yeah, it's I think there's a bit of a culture change, like a lot of companies are doing, honestly, which is like just realizing that there are certain software that is just, it doesn't make sense to build at all. It's like, I mean, it's like there's obviously like established norms in organizations. So it's like if you were starting a startup, you wouldn't be like, step one, before I start building my product, I'm going to build spreadsheet software because we need spreadsheet software. You'd be like Google Sheets, obviously. And the same is true of like On-Call, right? So On-Call is now like established enough. So you'd be like, I'm going to use PagerDuty or Opsgenie, right? And now, Incident.io, obviously. But like where we started, it was in that weird space where everyone, it was like nascent enough domain that people were like, yeah, I can build a Slack bot. I'll do it myself. Like I don't need Incident.io. When you start building in that direction, as I did at Monzo, so I wrote like a really, really simple version of what we have at Incident.io at Monzo, and then open sourced it. And like I started building, it's like, this is great. I want it to be able to control my status page and like escalate to people from Slack and like do a little bit of like orchestration of process and stuff. And then it very quickly became, I've just launched a product internally, and now I'm a sideline project manager for, product manager for this product that I never wanted to be in the
remember
world.
like asking for, you go in, you're like, it'd be really cool if it did this. And Chris is like, yeah, it would. I don't have any time to do that.
Yeah,
but like
people are making
like
very
pull
reasonable
requests welcome, and you're sort of like, but also like, I've got another job to do, and didn't you build this, and isn't this your thing? And
Yeah,
well, suddenly it's owned by no
like,
one.
yeah, everyone
And-
assumes it's like officially owned software that is, which team owns this? You're like, it's me, and I program it mostly when I'm watching my kids at swimming.
in some dodgy Python.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, not dodgy. Very good Python.
Yeah, well,
very,
beg to differ.
Yeah, yeah.
That's so funny. And I guess like you also kind of like practice this as listening. Obviously you guys are very like, it's a very technical team. But I think to start off with, like you were building with Heroku. I thought that was quite interesting that like you were like, we need to just ship fast.
It was so refreshing. I remember so like coming from Monzo, where Monzo, very, very technical infrastructure. They had like famously thousands of microservices all running on a home like built Kubernetes cluster, and like you needed a full team to run it. I remember just being like incidents, just pull requests and code.
Push to master, auto deploy.
Yeah.
I mean, to be clear, when we started to get like real customers, there was like some rigor and some process. But in the early days, we were just like, does this thing even work?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, yeah, you don't need all the bells and whistles, safeguards.
We didn't have monitoring for so that was the thing. So one of the biggest amount of time I ended up spending like later years at Monzo was like on the monitoring stuff. So they were like collecting and ingesting like millions, maybe billions of samples an hour of like all these different things, and like so that everyone could power dashboards and stuff like that. And I remember starting here and be like, that's a bit of work to do that. And we haven't got customers yet. And like when we had the first few customers, like even now we've got logs, so we can sort of figure out stuff, and it's not really holding us back from debugging stuff.
I mean, if there's a problem,
like,
it will get reported to Sentry, and then we'll get a notification, and then we'll fix it.
I think that's it. It's like I think early days were sort of trying to sound too sort of self-congratulatory. It's like I think it was just like a maniacal focus on the product and like build the product, and like everything else was just like let it burn. If it's good enough, it's good enough kind of thing.
Yeah, it was like until someone's paying you and your product is sort of starting to grow and hit product market fit, like nothing else really is that important, right? It's like, I think one of the things that So like Heroku, for example, you know, a lot of people would call out like, surely for an incident management platform, like is Heroku the most like scalable, stable platform? My honest answer is like, yeah, it was pretty awesome for the first sort of year or so. And we managed to scale far past where I thought we'd get to. But I think sort of one of the things that really helps is like you can make trade-offs like that where you kind of go with a thing that will last you for a little while, but not forever, because you don't know that you're going to need something much more scalable, or you go there precisely because you do know you need something much more scalable and you know now's not the time, right? And so what was interesting is you've got, me and Stephen and Chris each spent a decade plus building stuff. And, I'd seen Go Cardless from like tiny, literally also Heroku, esque shape, tiny, like needs all the way up to massive infrastructure. And same probably at Monzo for Chris, or I think he's probably saw some of the most rapid growth. It was like, the 500K to 5 million journey and all that stuff. And like, when you've done that, I think it gives you the confidence to go like, well, I've seen it done both ways. And I kind of know that we don't need any of that stuff. And I think it's almost more intimidating. And I started out was like, do I need to care about all these things and scale and what have you? And I think part of the reason we went for so many like out the box, amazing, put in a credit card and buy it shape dev tools is like, we will know when we need to change. And therefore I'm totally comfortable taking any risks or taking shortcuts, because like when it becomes a problem, like we will know because we've done this before. And we did. And eventually we sort of, switched it up and reached a point where we moved off Heroku and did a migration, and that was all totally fine. But we got probably, massive acceleration boost in the early days. And it wasn't just Heroku, there's other stuff as well. And some things last you for ages, like Sentry.
No problems.
Still with us to this day. Fantastic software. Like probably some of the best money I spend as a engineering leader. So yeah.
Yeah, it's something that I think is actually like quite important, because I feel like in DevTools especially, there's almost like a bit of, I don't know if it's like, it's the right word, proud to be doing something in like a hard way.
Yeah, it's like blog post driven development. It's like, yeah, look how we built a really, really like complex thing. And you're like, early days, it was like there was nothing to blog about. It was like, it's a very simple Go app that takes JSON and does some stuff with it and turns it into JSON elsewhere. Oh, more interesting.
Got a friend that describes, I think it was back at my time at Go Cardless, and he was, he sort of boiled down our entire job in like a few sentences to sort of like our entire day is essentially spent putting things in a database, taking it out and showing it in HTML, and then putting it back in the database. Initially, you're like, no, it's way harder than that. And then you're like, actually, a lot of it is kind of just that. And until you get to a certain scale, honestly, like a lot of it, just isn't that complicated, and you don't need, it's like, what matters more, like having it be ready for the billion users that you may or may not ever get, or like getting a user. It's a bit cliche, but it's like, it's very, very true. Like the corners that we cut were horrendous, and my team would get a massive slap on the wrist if they did some of the stuff we did in the early days now. But that's because we have, hundreds and hundreds of customers and like billions of requests and hundreds of thousands of incidents. And it's like, yeah, I mean, the game changed.
Do you know what you just reminded me of? I just remember a hilarious comment where I was mid-incident and I sort of found this comment on this thing, and it said, to do, obviously not this.
Yeah, that was
like
from Stephen. I remember it. Yeah,
it's just like, I know it's just absolute arse what I have read here.
I'm going to ship it anyway. There are a lot of comments like that.
Yeah, just like, if you're an engineer in the future, this was deliberately rubbish. Please rewrite it actively. If you're looking at this, that is enough signal that you should redo it.
Have you seen online like the ones where people like leave comments of like, hey, I came to this function probably with the same assumptions of you, of like, I can fix this and make it better. Here's what I did. If this is your set of steps you're going to follow, don't do it. Like, just leave it as is.
One of my favorite files at Go Cardless was we had this file which was all to do with like, I think it was to do with like some payment processing bit that was like very gnarly, very complex, extremely well tested, to be clear. But it was like, if you're coming here and changing it, it was like very, it's highly risky. And our CTO at the time, Harry Marr, he'd done a dragon in ASCII, and it was just huge. So it was like sort of, you had to scroll past this huge dragon in ASCII, and it just said like, warning traveler, like, beware dragons, etc. And I just thought that was really fun. That was a moment of just like, okay, get the joke, but also like, I will be a little bit more careful. And then eventually we had in terms of like scaling and getting better, eventually we replaced this piece of slightly gnarly functionality, and the PR was called like, slay the dragon. Yeah. It was great. It was great.
That's so funny. Yeah, one of the things I really like about Instant is I think you've got like a really good sort of brand around like, I think like who you are as a company. It feels like maybe that's like if that kind of makes sense. Like I'm even looking at Chris's merch. That's
Move fast when you break things.
Didn't get me one. Ordered a bunch of these brand new things for the team.
didn't get one.
We were on the way, and Chris is like, "It's great. I'm going to wear my new hoodie." And I was like, "Cool. Do I get one?" He's like,
"No." Everyone in the company gets so this is like annual gift for employees around like Christmas time. This is the thing this year. Pete has got one. I didn't give him his because we're giving him out this afternoon. Didn't give Pete his because I was like, if we sat here wearing sort of matching hoodie, it's a little bit sort of trite, I think. Yeah. Well, at this stage, I get to wear it and
swap mid podcast. We could like
have what we could do. We could swap share mid pod.
Like parents with kids that can't share, and they're just like, well, you get a bit of time each.
Sure. But yes, to your point on brand, to bring it back. We do care a ton about this. I think it's like often underrated in startups. Is sort of like a bit of like, what is your identity? What are you about? Like, I was listening to a thing the other day, and they were like, brand is like, if Nike was to open a hotel, exactly what Nike's hotel would be like, kind of thing. Whereas, if
I'm trying to think what our hotel would be like.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Just a lot of fire.
Fire and like lots of little comedic quips. We sort of have a few like sort of principles around this in marketing, and nothing super concrete, but like it's sort of like be personal, like don't use marketing-y language, like inject humor. Like we're in a very serious domain. Like incidents is not really a traditionally like laughing matter.
It kind of speaks for itself. So the only way is up.
Right? That's it. Yeah. And I think being able to lean into a bit of the, our website, the H1R website is literally move fast when you break things. And it's sort of, we had great feedback on that as like a little thing. But it's like, I think, it's nice to inject a bit of like humor and sort of playfulness into that stuff. I think work to be done on it still, but kind of right.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. I guess is like, I feel like a lot of like, sort of like, war, like soldiers have like dark humor, and it's like it feels like it's like the closest thing to that in dev.
I think a lot of it you'll find in incidents as well, and I think I've been in plenty of incidents where sort of that's been well received, and plenty others where it hasn't. But I think there's we talk about sometimes you just got to like laugh, otherwise you'll cry, right? There's kind of there's been instances that I've been in my career, the same if not worse in some cases, where it's like it's really, really difficult, right? You're kind of, everyone's super stressed. They're like extremely emotional things rather than just like super logical engineering-y things. It's like, no, there's like active stress. Like, if you finish an incident and it's been a really heavy one, like you need somewhere for that tension to go. And sometimes all you need is, I think, when everything's on fire, maybe just like that moment where you've stopped the bleeding and everyone just needs a bit of pause or like relief, and, someone to just like break the tension, sort of lighten the mood a little bit is really, really helpful, because otherwise you can spend 9 hours in sort of like, super frowny, stressful, like, it just feels like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, and kind of a little bit of humor goes a long way.
It definitely nets out a positive, I think. It's like, it's all about the judicious use, I think, which is like, no one wants, the comedian in the corner, you're like, oh, no, we really have to fix this thing. And like, Pete's just cracking one-liners.
You fix it first, save the one-liners for after, but like,
I remember a really bad incident at Monzo, and one that we wrote about publicly, a big public post-mortem I wrote up about it. I remember sitting in a room that was called the Summer of Monzo. Like, I can't remember the reason for that meeting room being called that, but it had like summer themes. It had like an inflatable palm tree. There was like a deck chair in the room. And I remember Tom, the CEO, came in, and this is like the sort of war room of the incident. So like team leads and stuff. And this was lots and lots of teams involved. So it was like the central place, and I'm sort of trying to coordinate stuff. I remember sort of the stress of being like, and also the CEO is right here. It was really serious. I remember Tom just turning to me and being like, oh, I find these incidents really, really exciting sometimes. and that's not to say that like he is sort of like making light of it, right? He was going to be on the receiving end of press and was having to do comms with regulators and all this stuff. But it's like, I don't know, it's just that moment of just like someone being like, it's okay. Like, I sort of trust that the right things are happening, the right people are doing the absolute best that they can, and like it's not on me to kind of lay on extra pressure here, and like a little pressure release is actually probably a good thing. But I sort of, I don't know, I kind of think about that a lot in incidents, is to like channel a bit of my inner Tom Blomfield from that day.
Yeah, what a guy. Yeah. Like stepping back, the bigger point is, it seems like you guys have a very strong understanding of like your users and the kind of culture of them? And do you think it's just because of your backgrounds, or is it something that you also put like a lot of effort into?
I think it's a bit of both. So it's like, we are obviously like, it's like building a little bit with cheat codes when you're building for, past self kind of thing. So it's like, would this feature have been useful for me when I was running an engineering team of, 30 people or something like that? And you're like, yes, I know exactly how that would be there. So that's really helpful. I think it can be also a bit of a curse in that you lean a lot on your own experiences, and that can cause you to shortcut the like go and validate with customers sometimes. And so like sometimes you get things wrong, is another part of it. But yeah, and I think like the other thing that's sort of a bit of a cheat code is that we're like massive nerds about this stuff, like honestly. So it's like not
some of us are bigger nerds than others.
Yes. So I think in terms of incidents, I would say I'm like a big nerd about those sorts of things. And so like I mean, a good example, case in point, I spent several weekends reading like an 84-page report that came out of the National Air Traffic Service about a massive incident that they had in 2023. And sort of went deep into the depths of like what was the technical fault, which was like a flight plan ingestion issue, and then like how did they respond to this incident and stuff, and sort of wrote it into a blog post, and actually was received really, really well. And like I really like that kind of like translate very complicated report that's very big into simple thing with like some digestible takeaways. The point here is I think we spend a ton of time just nerding out on this stuff. So whether it's like product things we're nerding out on, or like incident-y things, both like in engineering fields and outside, I think all of that just lends itself to, I mean, it's like it basically at this point, it's like my life is my work, and like it sort of integrates seamlessly and fluidly with my family and my kids and things like that. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's sort of the bad version of the world, which is like I'm doing it and I don't have a choice. And then there's the good version, which is like I've managed to meld a thing I love working on day to day with family and stuff outside of work. I think on the sort of personality and brand side, I think some of that is extremely deliberate, and some of that's just natural and passive. So even if you look at like a lot of the like marketing copy and tone, right? You could say like, oh, we've made a really active decision to not take ourselves too seriously, to not use like super serious corporate jargon. It like honestly just not that deliberate in the early days. That's just us being us. And then actually we found that like it's much more natural, it feels better. Yeah. And then that starts to translate into like the product, right? We've sort of tried to like harness it and capture it a little bit. And then you do that for long enough, and suddenly the people you hire start to feel like that and emulate that. And then, your branding starts to feel and emulate that. And eventually you're kind of like, well, this sort of feels like everything just reflects. And now it's in our marketing, and now it's in our product, and it sort of organically evolves. And then you can start to dial it up, where you're like, okay, well, like this is good. We like this. It feels good. How can we do more of it? And then it spreads into your like events and the way you kind of run your conferences and things like that as well. Yeah, that's been just really nice. Versus like, I never felt like as a company we had to be something different to what I would want to be as a founder, if that makes sense. Like I don't have to talk differently now. For example, I'm not like, oh, I have to go put my like podcast face on. Yeah. I'm just like, no, I'll just like.
He's never been media trained, is what he's saying. You wouldn't believe it.
Yeah. And by the end of this podcast, you'll know exactly what Chris means. No, but it's like, but that's really nice because it means you kind of get this authenticity that comes through. And I think to your point on, does it really help you understand your users, and does it help you sort of build better product for them? I think absolutely does, because if you kind of understand your users and you can kind of speak their language and kind of do that authentically, I think that makes a massive, massive difference. Yeah. And I have a lot of respect for, but I'm also slightly kind of, apprehensive or confused by like companies that are desperately trying to sell stuff to people they don't understand, or that they haven't, who with experience this, they haven't lived, for example. Yeah. I'm just like, how do you do that? Because like I can sit with an engineer or a CTO and we can literally, if nothing else, I'm just like, ever had stuff blow up in production? It's like, that's the easiest conversation topic starter ever. But like, if I was trying to sell something, I don't know, to someone that I'd never...
Accountancy software is always the reference point for me. I'm like,
regardless, honestly, it was like, I found that tough. Like internally, I really loved it. The team were whip smart. Like product was really great. Like super successful business. But like...
You weren't passionate about direct debit.
But like, when we're joining us like direct debit and accounting software integrations and like, those customers, it's great to serve their needs, but it wasn't like, you don't get the buzz of... Yeah. Like, I know I've solved your problem and I get it and I know why you love this and I love it too. And like, that makes a huge difference. Also just tactically on product, it helps you make better decisions much quicker because you can follow your gut versus needing to research and validate every single decision because you don't know.
I've followed you guys for a while, and I realized that I've actually seen a lot of posts, not from you founders, but just like from your team. So I think one recent one, maybe this was actually founders. Actually, I'll just say this one I wanted to say was like quite funny. That was like about the Christmas tree. There's been an incident like you've ordered a Christmas tree that's like too tall.
But the team were the ones that like did it
Created the
internally,
incident.
and they sort of they created the incident.
Yeah. That was very funny and very on brand with like the whole thing. And then I think also Lawrence in your team wrote this like really interesting article about like buying a new M3.
So interestingly, that over this year, our single highest like trafficked like blog posts. We pulled the stats actually recently.
It comes up. So when we go to like dinner with for engineering meetups or whatever, that quite frequently comes up in the context of like other CTOs being like, yeah, thanks for that. Basically just gave my entire engineering team a like sort of logical and mathematically backed up argument for why I had to buy them all new laptops.
The thing I enjoyed most.
Sorry, not sorry. Like,
what I enjoyed most though was the hacker. It made its way onto Hacker News first front page, and Pete just got absolutely eviscerated by Hacker
it's Hacker News. They all responded totally level-headed and reasonably.
You were the villain. You're the bad guy.
He was the villain. It was like, oh, this awful CTO. I can't believe he's.
Well, there were like two major complaints that came through in all the themes. Obviously, just like watch the thing burn. But one was like, I can't imagine ever working for someone like this where I'd have to make such a difficult and comprehensive argument just to get a new laptop. And you're like, I think you misunderstood what happened here. And we actually had quite a lot of fun. And then the other people who were like sort of flaming it were like, this is really dumb. Like, you don't need to do this. What a waste of money and time. And you're just like, I think you've misunderstood. Like, we're a startup. This kind of stuff is fun. I know that it's going to go down well.
Yeah, it was probably an offhand comment where Lawrence was like, can I have an M3? And you're like, if you can justify it, go for it. And he's gone, I'm going to nerd out.
The conversation was actually
a massively overkill analysis.
Exactly. It was more like the way I actually turned about was like, we had like 3 people come up to me and be like, what's the policy on laptop replacement? And I was like, oh yeah, it's like Apple's release, whatever announcement. And so I went into the team and I was like, stop asking me for new laptops. You've all got exactly the right laptop that you need. And then, but I was like, but what I'll do, I'll order a test laptop. And like, if we can prove that it's going to be faster, then sure, let's do it. It'll be fun. I'm a nerd, right? And Lawrence was like, I'll do like a bunch of analysis. And actually off the back of it, I think he puts it in the post, but it's like, you could see it as a sort of gimmicky stunt or just like a fun side quest. But actually some of the stuff we did was really, really interesting, was like instrumenting all of our build times and telemetry on all of the laptops, which we still have now. So like kind of didn't have it before, but I can tell whether we're building faster or slower than we were before. And as the app gets larger, it's like, oh, people are waiting like more time for their builds to happen on their local machines. And actually that's kind of cool to know. Stuff like that. So we got actually quite a lot out of it that's then sort of, followed us through to this day. So it's kind of, partly started as a bit of a joke and a bit of me just baiting Lawrence and doing some work to kind of get some cool metrics, and sort of turned into, a pretty solid decision.
My very first company I worked at as a software engineer, it was the product I was working on was like a C++ monolith, right? And it was built in Visual Studio, whatever it was. When I joined the company, it took 28 minutes to build. So you'd make a change and you'd be like, right, off to go and make another. You literally can count the number of the
XKCD, right? It's like, why are you messing around?
I remember I'd be like, right, well, it's like you can count the number of changes you can make in a day and test as a result of that. And so I remember we had the same thing, which was like every time someone got a new CPU, we'd be like, what's your build time? Like by the end, it was like down to like 9 minutes, and that's a mixture of like hardware and like optimizations around build, but like it is meaningful, especially like the time when Lawrence was asking for that. It was like right when we were building On Call and we were building mobile app, heavy compilation. So it's not like, hey, we're running a Go binary which compiles in 20 seconds versus 25 seconds or whatever else it might be. It's like meaningful amounts of time.
Yeah, as mobile dev was the prompt for like, hey, like this might be actually really good because it's got more cores, etc., etc. Sort of as a general principle, the piece of sort of culture that probably is worth being aware of, or like you don't necessarily have outside the company, is the kind of focus that we have on that dev experience, right? And it's kind of people are pretty allergic, like the build times go over whatever, like 5 minutes for example in CI, and we have tons and tons of every 6 months or so we'll do a big bash to like pull the build times down, and it's that time of like the thing that I care about is like from the moment that the thing works on your machine, how long until it works in prod, and like how short can you get that when you culturally embed it? You end up with fun scenarios like that, but they're also kind of they're material ones. We track all this stuff, and I think it makes a difference. Like teams that ship quickly ship more, and that's great, right?
That's amazing. Still, the more combinations of like fun but serious. It's like
it's great. Yeah.
I think we're actually probably slightly getting towards the end. And I realize we haven't talked about AI and building with AI.
We haven't. We've managed to almost do a whole podcast without talking about AI.
I think you have some pretty interesting takeaways on implementing like GenAI stuff into your projects.
Yeah, I mean, there's endless things we could talk about with AI. I mean, there's the stuff we've built, there's the stuff we're building now, there's the stuff we're building next. We can kind of cover all of it. There's endless.
Yeah, I think if we've had like most people, a pretty fun journey with AI. So like I think if I look at this year and reflect on what we've done the sort of sprinkles with AI across an existing product surface. So and that's sort of not to do it a disservice, right? It's really, really good stuff. So like LLMs, like they're sort of like core at taking corpus of language and doing other things with that language, right? And so when you look at incidents, which are broadly just like a bunch of people speaking about things, it's very obvious that is a great application of like being able to sort of take that, reduce it, sort of munge it into different formats and stuff. And so things we shipped this year were like auto-generating summaries of incidents. It's like, someone who joins them, can they very quickly get up to speed on what's happening? And like in most incidents, status quo before AI was like, no, because no one thinks to do that, because they're optimizing for like, how do I fix the thing fast and keep moving forwards? And it's really important, right? It's like that's my way of staying on top of incidents happening at our company, right? As I jump onto the dashboard, I have a Kanban board and I'm like, brilliant. So anyway, like that works phenomenally well. And like the graphs of, people now setting incidents, and, we sort of ship that with that human in the loop kind of mechanics. So it'd always be like, we're not automatically doing things. So there's like zero risk of, or close to zero risk of hallucinations there. So, or saying the wrong thing. So people have to go, yep, that's right. Or no, that's not quite right. I'll edit it before I set it. Things like pulling like actions, like follow-up actions from incidents out of what was said. So like there's so many times in incidents where midway through the incident, you'll be like, oh, we should really, really remember to fix this because this thing's tripped us up many times. And everyone's like, yeah, I'll do that. And then no one does it because you forget and it's hidden midway in a channel. And we now have a thing where when you close the incident, we'll be like, hey, here are the 5 things that you suggested you should follow up with and do that. Do you want to track them in Jira?
And here are 3 things that you said you wanted to do but didn't turn into follow-ups. And like, maybe you want to create these and you're like, oh yeah, thank you, click. Like,
and they're just like onto your backlog straight away. The stuff that I think is more interesting, so that's like, I think table stakes kind of things and like auto naming of incidents, right? And it's like, it's cute. It's really helpful.
Convenience functions and like super popular as well for what it's worth. These aren't like edge case features. I think, we had some crazy stat, like within like 3 months of launching the auto summarization update stuff, it was like, 60% of the updates that are being shared had been drafted by our sort of, AI first, which I think is really, really cool. So if you can view that as like, how much time have we saved people by like sort of doing those drafts? So it's very material, but like it's very much sprinkles.
Yeah. The cool stuff though, the really good stuff, shipping in like private alphas and sort of betas now and next is two sort of things we're working on, which we're really excited about. So number one, sounds a little bit sort of trite, but is a really, really useful feature, which is essentially inside of an incident channel. Like the sort of status quo is that you have to use / commands in Slack. So you'd be like /incident page P. And you'd be like, great, you do that. And it's like for power users, great. But for people who are like, this is my first incident, I haven't done it before, we now have the ability for you to just be like, incident, can you grab P for me? And it'll be like, great, here's a button, push this, it will page him. And it's like, incident, can you just pause this, log a follow-up and remind me about it in the morning? It's like, great. I think a lot of people are shipping like these kind of assistant-y type things and they're a bit like hit and miss. I think it's really, really good. And we can see how it's changing how the team are interacting with incidents in there. So that's really good. And we did that partly because of that sort of human to us kind of interaction, but also as a foundation for the other stuff that we're working on, which is like the foundation there was broadly like, can we get an AI thing to understand language and take action off the back of it, or prompt action is maybe a more accurate way to put it. The thing that leads into is this thing we're calling investigations, which is broadly, if you look at the first 15 minutes of an incident, it's like trying to orient yourself around like, cool, I think this should be working. don't understand why it's not working, but I've been alerted that it's broken. And you're like, great, well, what do I do here? It's like, first I'll go and like look at what the alert is. Then I'll go and jump to the dashboard that is behind that alert and look, are the graphs looking funny? Is there a spike? Has something changed? Has something stopped running? And then you'll maybe go and look at like past incidents and be like, well, hang on, has something similar happened before? Has anyone shipped anything to production recently? And all of that is like a load of time. Like it takes ages to do that stuff. And it's like really undifferentiated stuff for a human to do. It's essentially pattern matching against a big corpus of data. Is that the sort of very reductive way to kind of phrase that? We will go off and we will go, great. Based on the alert, based on things that we know, we will kind of plan out an investigation for you, and we'll get great. We're going to check code changes. We're going to check, your metrics. We're going to check all these sorts of things, and then we can come back with based on everything we've seen, this is probably what we think is wrong. You go and validate that, and here are the next steps that you can follow here. So like last time this happened, we immediately paged the CTO because it was really, really bad. You'd be like, great. I'll do that.
Probably going to do that.
And so it's still we haven't taken the leap into, AI runs my incidents for me and fixes things. I think that is something that the industry and the broader engineering world is like very, very sort of like hesitant about. Like I think rightfully. And so for us, it's very much like, how do we arm humans to make them much more effective and able to focus on like differentiated parts of what they can do best in incidents. So it's super exciting. It's sort of, we've been running ourselves now for a while, and there is like, a bunch of times where you're like, this is fucking amazing. And you're like, this is the dumbest thing ever.
It's a roller coaster, but like when it gets it right, like it's amazing.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe it just did that. Like basically debugged and it was correct.
Yeah.
And I think sort of, I guess to Chris's point on, I think we are seeing probably a competitor pop up in this space weekly at this point. It's like, which makes sense. It's like a fantastic thing to go after. And I think a lot of people are starting with I'm going to build like the perfect AI SRE and that'll be in your instant and it'll like fix your Kubernetes for you. And it will replace infrastructure engineers, all that kind of stuff. And I think as a North Star, I get why you'd aim for that. But I think as a practitioner and someone that's been in the Slack channels and been on the ground, I don't want that. I describe it as my team of the most likely outcome there is that you end up with the effect, which is kind of like the, massively overconfident senior engineer that sort of thinks they know it all and just makes it all 10 times worse. And that's not what you want. You don't want to turn up and have someone just being trust me, I've got this. It's like no one when everything is on fire wants someone to tell them to leave them alone. They've got it. What you want is a super smart person who has checked all the sensible things at the start of an incident, can download that context really, really quickly, get you up to speed, and then go, cool, where do we go now? Yeah. Right? And maybe you go a step further, which is and here's some options or suggestions, here's some routes. What would I want from Chris if I rock up to an incident and Chris is there 15 minutes before me? That to me is the bar that maybe you should shoot a little bit higher than Chris, but exactly. Maybe if Chris Barr is here, I go a little bit higher than that. But no, but that I think is what you're shooting for is you want the kind of amazing partner versus the kind of I don't even have to touch it. And I think it's going to be a point of contention and debate, but I kind of, sit pretty firmly on the side of for now, what everyone needs is superpowers, not to be replaced. And so we'll start there and then we'll sort of see where we end up. And so far, honestly, it's super, super exciting. You can think of it as, you build this thing and it's this tiny little agent and you sort of start with, what are your constraints as an incident responder? When you enter an incident, and I think, step one is, can it sort of make certain scale blockers go away? So it's I can check some past incidents, but I can't scour 50,000 of them. We can do that in seconds, right? So you start with that kind of stuff, and then you start to layer in can you go and poke things for me or read my dashboards and bring that context in. And then you start to get into a lot of can you make some suggestions? Layer it all on, and every improvement you make kind of feeds into the next improvement. More and more context, more and more abilities. And you can kind of start to just remove these bottlenecks for responders one at a time. It's what is actually slowing you down? And it's usually access to context, ability to do a bunch of stuff really quickly, do things in parallel. Yeah.
Okay. Final things that I want to ask you. So 2 quick rapid fires. So one is what takeaway you would have for other DevTools founders, if there was one thing you would advise them. And the second thing is if there's any dev tools that you're using at the moment that have been really handy that might not be on people's radar.
I'm going to say the second question first because I think it qualifies as a dev. Maybe it doesn't qualify. Linear is the thing, and I've come from original days of this company building code, and we use Linear for that. And so me, Pete, and Steven would be like, I was like, oh my god, it's like Jira, but someone's reimagined it better. Gone away. I now work in like the commercial side of the business, mostly in marketing, and I've just introduced Linear for the marketing team, and I'm so flipping excited to be back on it. It's like we're sort of considering like a wholesale company operating system exists around Linear. So big fan of that. You can have the
Also customers.
Yeah.
Just saying. Very good customers as well. Kind of quality bar is extremely high over there. So yeah. I don't know. There's tons. I think like, I don't know if you can qualify it as a dev tool, but I think one of the things that I've seen a massive uptake of in the team and a huge accelerant for us recently has been, the team have all been using Claude. And like, I kind of initially was like, yeah, sure. Like, here's a credit card, like, knock yourself out. But actually I've sort of sat with a few of them while they've been pairing and using it. And
using like Cursor, or they're using
Claude like a sort of, so they'll kind of jump in and they'll be like, they'll screenshot a piece of UI. We've pre-trained Claude with like our Tailwind rules, our style guides. Like we've basically told Claude how our entire app is pieced together. And then they'll just like ask it a question, throw it a piece of UI and be like, can you make this on the right versus the bottom? And Claude goes, yeah, no problem. Here's the code. Here's the diff. Like it's kind of wild. And then obviously there's a bit of tuning, but it's massively sped them up. And that never existed when I sort of was doing lots of engineering. I think it's really, really cool. I think anyway.
I've been using it with Cursor, but having the image stuff seems really cool. Yeah. Okay. And then final piece of advice that you would have to other DevTools founders?
Mine would be don't neglect UX. I think there's a real tendency that when you're building DevTools to focus on like utility and like basically engineers are super accommodating of things. Linear versus Jira, sort of functionally, you could stack them up and tick boxes in a check sheet of like all the features in both, and the UX makes the difference. I think that's how we think about products all the time, is it's incidents, but it's built and friendly for anyone kind of thing. So yeah, that'd be my one.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's a great, I think it's the folks at Evervault or something like that, have like a really, really lovely website, and they're an API, right? For security purposes. I think someone there was saying, I'd spend so much time on that, like visuals and experience and your website and like how you present your brand, and like you're a very, very technical tool. And they're like, well, like how do you express the level of care we put into our product when you can't see it? And you're like, well, you sort of, wrap it in something that sort of follows the same level of care. It's a really nice framing, which is sort of like, people generally perceive that if something's really, really well put together on the outside, it's probably similar care put on the inside. I thought it was really interesting. My advice, I think, probably the main thing that I think put us in a really, really good place with Instant AI, aside from kind of building for ourselves, like get someone to pay for what you're trying to build as early as possible. I think like we had a hard rule when we started, which was, I remember, talking about it, which was like, we're going to charge from day one.
Yeah.
And one of the things about DevTools is like, you can nerd out with another engineer and say, isn't this cool? And everyone will agree it's cool. And the more complicated it is, probably the cooler we think it is. Yeah. But like the real test is, will you pay me money? It doesn't even really matter what money you pay, but like you need someone to put a credit card in. And at that moment, like two things happen. One is it feels incredibly validating. Yeah. And two, like, it's worth something to someone versus just a curiosity. We didn't have a free plan for first 3 years of the company. We introduced one in March for on-call just because we wanted to see what would happen. But up until that point, nobody got the product for free. Everybody paid. And, and also when you're only dealing with paying customers, it's just massively focusing. Whereas like when you've got 200 free customers, it's like, do you build for them? Who do you listen to? Whereas when everyone's paying you money, it's like I'll build for this person because they want to give me more money or they want to expand. It's like a fairer trade of value. So yeah, my stance is like, don't build in a silo for fun, like charge someone for the thing.
Thank you so much, guys. That was really, really exciting. And thanks for coming along.
Thanks for humoring us.
And thanks everyone for listening.